Okay, so we ended before the dinner break. I hope everyone enjoyed their dinner. At the concept that if there is no victim, if no actual wrongdoing has taken place resulting in harm to someone else, there is no crime. And many people are, being jailed for victimless crimes that they've actually never actually harmed another being, and yet their freedom has been taken away. Another aspect about this concept of the difference between right and wrong behavior is we have to understand that there is no such thing as the ability to delegate a wrong to someone else. No one can say to someone, you may harm him, unchallenged or unaccosted, okay? That you're allowed to do that morally, okay? No more than anybody can say a group of people may commit a wrongdoing, and they have the moral right to commit it, to commit that wrongdoing. There's no such thing as that. Okay? So this is what many people who believe in things like government believe in, that we can delegate to a group of people who are calling themselves a government something that is not a right and agree, all come together and agree upon, they now possess this right. Rights can't be granted by human beings to other human beings. Everybody is born with the same rights because rights don't come from human beings. Rights, like the laws of nature, come from the creator of the universe. They don't come from human beings. Human beings don't make up what right and wrong are. Right and wrong are inherent to creation and are up to us to discover and recognize what they are and then live in accordance with those principles. So if a specific action is not a right for any individual, that action cannot be, quote, delegated, granted, or licensed to any other individual or group and magically called a right. It does not become a right. If it's wrong, it remains a wrong, no matter how many people believe they can do it or delegate it or otherwise. Similarly, a right can't be turned into a wrong. If it's a right and you're not harming somebody by doing it, somebody can't magically say, well, that's a wrong and you're not allowed to do that. And yet we have things that go right hand in hand with that, and it's called government. An action that is a wrong would forever remain a wrong under natural law. So how do we know what rights are? Part of knowing rights is understand that natural law, the difference between right and wrong, always holds true regardless of a population's belief system. Like natural law being in effect, the difference between right and wrong are not dependent on anybody's belief. They are eternal truths that need to be understood. So this means it does not matter how many people agree that a wrong can be turned into a right or that a right can be turned into a wrong. Such things can never be done in reality. We can believe we can do that and act like that, but in reality, it cannot actually be done. A right forever remains a right, a wrong forever remains a wrong. People can only believe that they can claim such reversals and that this will magically make it so. Unfortunately, most human beings erroneously believe that it is morally possible for them to create and delegate rights, quote unquote, which do not exist, or to take away actual rights from people which do exist. They believe we can do that. So when in doubt as to whether an action is or is not in harmony with natural law, the visualization exercise that I always ask people to do is to imagine a scenario of a planet, a world, where there is only two people, where only two people exist on an entire planet. Okay? If the behavior in that circumstance, in that visualized instance, is either a right or a wrong, in that instance, it remains a right or a wrong in any size population, regardless of how many people may believe otherwise. Okay? So if a right is a right for one person to do toward another, okay, or if it's a wrong, the action is a wrong for one person to take toward another, population is irrelevant. People will say, well, yeah, if there was a couple of people, that would be okay. But if in a world of 7 billion people, we can't let people do that. Well, this has nothing to do with what right and wrong is. As if they're changeable. Let's look at this scenario. So there's our world, and there's two people, okay? Two well-groomed businessmen. And we're going to look at it at an instance. let's look at taxation, the concept of taxation. Is taxation of any kind a right or a wrong? Is it morally acceptable and justifiable, or is it something that is actually a wrong? So let's look at what taxation really is. And again, we're not going to euphemize. We're going to talk about it straight on. So here's what taxation is. It's not what I believe it is. I'm getting down to the heart of the matter and describing what it actually is. Taxation is the claim that a specific group of people who call themselves government have been given a, quote, right. They've been delegated a right, okay? We've written down a law, and we say this people calling themselves the government and the IRS have a right to do this particular action, this activity, okay? This behavior. They've been given a right to confiscate, unwillingly, I might add, an arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor. Now let me just start with this, right? If you ask anybody, how many are you going to voluntarily pay more taxes? Nobody will raise their hand. And you say, why not? Well, because I could barely afford to pay the ones I'm paying now, and I don't want to volunteer any more money toward that endeavor. Quite frankly, I want my resources for myself to use as I see fit voluntarily. But if the government then said, well, your taxes are going up by 5%, how many people would pay them? Most people would. Because subconsciously or consciously, they recognize they're under coercion. They're actually under duress. They're being told that if they don't give this at the command of the people who are confiscating it, that some form of violence will be conducted upon them, whether through the form of fining them and saying, we're going to take more of your resources, whether by saying, we're going to throw you in a cage and make you stay there for as long as we say you need to stay there, okay? Or by actually conducting actual physical harm upon them. So, again, we're saying that this quote-unquote right is given to individuals who call themselves government, and then they have the right to confiscate this arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor. Because that's what money is, okay? Or that's what, whatever we make through what we work, that's the product of our labor. We work and then we get compensated for it. So that's in exchange for labor that we have done. That's our property, because we gave labor in return for that. So this is done whether or not the other agrees to share that product voluntarily. It's not a voluntary process. Coercion is involved. Taxation is enforced by the threat of violence, which is behavior that will result in bodily harm, or imprisonment, which is the taking away of physical freedom of movement, if those from whom the product is being seized attempt to resist this confiscation. This practice is always, quote, justified, and the word justify actually breaks down etymologically. The word justify means to create a right. That's what justify actually means. Jus in Latin means right or law. And then facere means to create or to make. So to justify means to create right, to make a right up and conjure it into existence. So it's always justified or made into a right, quote unquote, by those who claim that such a practice is necessary and required to, quote unquote, uphold the common good. This is the justification offered for the seizure of the product of people's labor involuntarily. Now, if we are honest with ourselves, if we define the concept of slavery, and I think this is a good definition for slavery, would it be fair to say slavery is the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being? That be a fair definition? You're saying you're working, I'm going to take whatever you generate as a result of that work that you're doing. It doesn't belong to you. The product of your labor doesn't belong to you. All of it belongs to me. So you work for me. I take everything that you have been able to amass or create through the labor that you have done. I think everybody here would agree that's slavery. That's as good as a definition of slavery as you're probably going to get. I mean, we can come up with some other definitions that involve coercion and physically shackling and keeping people. But if we really are honest with ourselves, what is the purpose of slavery to begin with is to make others work for free and then take all of the product of the labor. That's what slavery was conducted for. Okay? So, If we're defining slavery as the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being, we should be able to clearly see that there is no magical percentage to which we could lower this number that would no longer make it slavery. So I ask people, if the person who's saying I'm going to confiscate 100% of your labor and keep it for myself would say, well, I'm going to take 75%. I'll take 3/4. You can keep 1/4 of what you've created. Would that no longer constitute slavery? And I don't care what you say I'm going to use the 75% for. Okay? If you're telling somebody you have no choice, 75% of your labor belongs to me, would that no longer be slavery just because they allow them to keep 25? Okay, let's lower it to 50. Is it still slavery? Okay. Well, what percentage could it possibly be lowered to for it not to be slavery anymore? Only 0. There is no percentage that it could be lowered to for it not to constitute slavery. And again, if we're being honest with ourselves, many people want to justify this in many ways by saying, oh, it's used for services which someone doesn't have a right to refuse. You know, I tell people, hey, if I said to you, I'm a computer technician. You own a computer? Okay, I'm now your computer technician. You're not allowed to refuse my services. Just think about that for a moment. You may not refuse that I am now providing the service for your computer to keep it in good shape. Okay? First of all, what have I just taken from that gentleman? Right to choose. Free will. Right there, that's slavery. I don't even have to keep going and say, hey, if you refuse, or, you know, whether you want or don't want my computer services, I'm now your technician, and I need $200 every year. I'll come over a couple of times. I don't care whether you're happy with my service or not, okay? And if you don't pay me, I'm coming and taking the computer. Now, is that really your property if you're living under that kind of duress? Or am I just a violent criminal who's saying I'm going to steal your stuff if you don't give me what I say? I'm holding you under extortion. That's duress. That's called duress. It means I am threatening violence unto the person unless they conform to my will. And that's what we're all held under. We're held under duress. All forms of taxation are duress. It is a master class telling people you have no right to refuse the arbitrarily set confiscation of your labor that I deem is going to be necessary for what I say it's necessary for. So how could you possibly claim that your home belongs to you if you're paying something called a property tax? That somebody is saying, for the services we provide in this community, you must pay us this percentage, and if you don't pay it, your house is going to be turned over to the government. And it's, you know what that's called? There's a term for that, okay? When a society doesn't actually have true private property ownership rights, and a higher class of masters actually owns the land and owns the property and only allows the peasant class to live upon the property for as long as they pay tribute to the master class, who can tell me what system of government that is? That's called feudalism. And that's the United States government and just about every government on the earth. You live in feudalism. There's no such thing as democracy. There's certainly not a constitutional republic, that's for sure. Okay? The de facto state of government, which means indeed in action, is feudalism. And feudalism is just another euphemism. It's a euphemism for slavery. Okay? Because slaves aren't allowed to own property. Slaves aren't allowed to keep the product of their labor. You know? That's all it really is. If we're being honest with ourselves. Once again, there's my catchphrase for this section. Okay? We want to euphemize it, justify it, call it something else. Right? I said this to that New Age woman at the UFO conference. And she said, again, I prefer not to see it that way. Well, you're not being honest with yourself. You're lying. It's called lying to yourself. That's what cognitive dissonance is. It's called lying to yourself. Okay? So, If we're being honest with ourselves, taxation's merely a euphemism for theft, violence, and slavery, the practices upon which it is actually based. And since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of the product of another's labor, such behavior can never be, quote, delegated to a group of people and called a right. Therefore, it follows logically that all forms of taxation, I don't care what they are, excise tax, property tax, gift tax, inheritance tax, income tax, I don't care what form it is, taxes on corporations even, okay? All forms of taxation are always wrong according to natural law because they are all based in the destruction of free will, they are based on coercion, and they are ultimately based upon violence, all of which are wrongdoings, all of which are forms of theft, and all of which not one individual has the right to perform upon another. And this is what people want to justify and believe can be magically turned into a right, just because they want to euphemize it and call it taxation. Let's look at another example. Prohibition, one of my pet peeves, okay? I'm big into health, into eating right, okay? I'm huge into juicing. It's one of my favorite things to do. Purification of the body is part of purification of the mind, all right? But I'm going to tell you, I'm 100% for anybody being allowed to put anything into their body because they own their body. If I want to break up this remote control in little pieces and eat it with a sprinkling of pepper, then that's my right to do so, regardless of what the chips may do to my intestinal tract, okay? There's a reason I have the right to eat this remote if I want to. You want to know why? My body is my property. It belongs to me. Now, we did this in the natural law seminar. We asked people, do you own your own body? Almost every single student in the seminar, now, of course, they immediately answered, yes, I own my own body. The students grasped this, okay? The people they were asking the questions to, okay, because the students were doing the tabulation of, accumulating the answers from people that they asked the questions to. And one of the questions I asked them to ask people is, do you own your own body? Almost every student in my first natural law seminar, when they asked people if they own their own body, they came back to the next class and almost every student said, almost everybody they asked that question to paused for a long time and thought about it. Had to sit and think about this question. Could not immediately spit out, absolutely, my body is my property. And because I think people want to overthink things and say, well, am I going to own my body forever? I'm going to die one day. Does that mean I don't own it now? What's the over-intellectualization and mystification of this concept? I tell people, I recognize fully I'm going to die one day and this flesh is going to crumble and pass into the earth, okay? Does that mean I don't own my body right now? I'm using my body right now. That's why I own it, specifically. Specifically because my consciousness inhabits this body and I'm using it as the vehicle for the expression of my consciousness is the very reason I own my body, okay? And people can't spit that out. It's like unfathomable to me. The ridiculousness of some of this, that the human mind could be worked into the situation that it has been, is almost incomprehensible. So let's go forward with prohibition, okay? It's the claim that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right to prevent others from putting any given substance into their own bodies, and if others refuse to comply with those terms, that they will be fined or imprisoned. And it should be self-evident that if an individual's body is actually their own property, and it is, then that individual always maintains the natural right to decide what will or will not be put into their property, which is their body. Why can you put what you want into your car or your home? Because you own it. It's your property. Okay? Technically, it should be. I mean, technically it isn't really, but my whole point is nobody else can tell, no other individual can tell you what you can and can't put into your home. Okay? Could I tell you, hey, I don't want you putting that jacket in your car. You're not allowed to put it in there. Well, who am I to tell you you're not allowed to put that in there? It's your property. Okay? So why would we accept that not accept that, but we would accept I can't put something in my own body that I deem that I want in it. Okay? Because people can't separate the act of imbibing the substance or putting the substance into the body, okay, from the action that people may subsequently take. And they're two different things. So somebody might go out and want to get smashed tonight and do a bunch of drinking, but if you then go out on the street and start clubbing somebody with the nearest available blunt object, you don't have a right to do that. You had a right to go drinking, okay, any more than you would have a right to go snort some cocaine or bang some heroin into your arm, okay? I don't think those two things are particularly good ideas, but I support your right to do it. But hey, if after you do those things you go and hurt somebody else, you got to be held accountable for the actions you just took. That's what personal responsibility is all about. And these two things need to be delineated from each other. We have to clearly be able to separate the act of the right to put something into my body and me still being personally responsible for what I do with my body. Okay? So, understanding that this is a claim made to tell people that I'm going to make the decision about what you put into your body. We can easily see this claim of this right to command what will or will not be put into the body of another person. What it actually amounts to is a claim of ownership upon the body of another person. If I'm telling you you can't drink orange juice, I'm making a claim, your body belongs to me because I'm going to decide what goes into it or what does not go into it. Okay? So if I say carrots are off limits for your consumption, sir, and they may not be ingested, I've just made a claim that I own your body. Well, what's the claim on the ownership of another person's body called? Slavery. If we're not euphemizing it, and if we're being honest with ourselves. Okay? Prohibition is merely the claim of ownership upon another person's body is called slavery. Therefore, prohibition is merely a euphemism for slavery that is backed by violence, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are, quote, necessary for the common good. That's always the justification. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim the ownership of another person's body, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and magically termed a right. Therefore, all forms of prohibition are always wrong according to natural law. Doesn't matter what the substance is. Doesn't matter what it is. How destructive it may be to the body or brain. Look, if I want to go under my sink, take some cleaning supplies and make a nice cocktail with some lye and some roach poison and some rat poison, stir it up in a water solution and go glug, 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 glug. That's my right. Want to know why? Because I own my body. I own my consciousness and my body, period, the end. So if I want to do that, that's my right to do so. Okay? Nobody has a right to tell me what I can and cannot put into my body. Yet we accept this because of these justifications that, it's for the common good. Forget what rights are. You know, it's for the common good. We need to accept slavery for the common good. Yeah, it works out like that. So how about licenses and permits? These are claims that a group of people who call themselves government. And again, we're going back and visualizing. Imagine one person trying to make this claim to another person. Nobody would find it legitimate. Nobody would find that one person may make that claim to another person. Yet we think these other people called government have rights that individuals don't have. That's what we think. That's called mind control. Mind control is getting people to accept some people have rights that other people don't have. That's what it is. You know? So go back to that visualization exercise. Can one person make that claim over another and have it be legitimate? Of course not. So if nobody has that right, how could that right be delegated to somebody else? It can't. Licenses and permits, they're claims that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right, quote unquote, the right to prevent others from exercising specific behaviors, even if such behaviors cause no harm to others or their property. Unless those others petition, meaning beg, or pay the government for permission. That's what a permit is. It means permission to be allowed to exercise those behaviors. This amounts to the claim that rights are actually merely privileges that may be granted or revoked by government at any time. Okay? Based upon The people in governments preference their discretion. All right? Remembering that the definition of a right is any action which does not cause harm to another living being or their property, there is no such thing as the right, quote unquote, to stop another person from exercising a right. If something is a right, meaning it doesn't cause harm, there is no such thing as someone's right to stop you from performing that action. Okay? That would be called coercion, which is a wrong. Okay? So the actual ingestion of, let's say, marijuana, for example, harms no one else. You can put that into your body, sit there perfectly peacefully, and not cause harm to another living being. That's called a right, for the very specific definition that it caused no harm. Okay? I would not have the right to tell another individual, you may not do that action. That would be a wrongdoing. Well, it's the same thing for something when it comes to licenses and permits. You're telling people, hey, if you pay me $50, I'll let you smoke that marijuana without doing violence to you. Unless I change my mind. And then I won't give you a permit. I'll just say, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Even something that is a right, like assembling and speaking. Like what was done in the state of Pennsylvania a few years ago when the G20 visited it in the city of Pittsburgh. Okay? The city telling people, we have revoked the right to assemble and speak and petition for grievances. You don't have the right to come and speak. No protests will be tolerated or we'll hit you with sound and water cannons. You know? And people just laid down and accepted it. The whole city of Pittsburgh. You know? Because, we're going to go and ask them for a permit. And they just said no. Nope. You don't have that right anymore. We find you on the street, you're getting blasted with a sound cannon and deafened. Some people went permanently deaf. Permanently deaf. Lost their hearing from what happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You see the stuff that was happening in, it wasn't Egypt, where they were hitting people with water cannons recently and killing some of them. It was in the Middle East somewhere. Turkey, correct. You know? Hitting people, some people died getting hit in the eye with such pressure it hits the brain. People were dead from water cannons. They call these non-lethal weapons. Because they're telling you, you may not speak. You may not assemble. We're going to revoke that right, really. See, there is no right to stop someone from exercising a pre-existing right. That's you making the claim, I own your rights. That's what that's really doing. That's saying, I'm God, I get to grant what a right is or revoke what a right is at any given time. It's basically what it is. It amounts to someone claiming to be God. The claim over the rights of another person is called slavery. Even more so, it is the claim to be God. The claim that the rights of another flow from you. Therefore, licensing and permits are merely other euphemisms for slavery, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are, quote, necessary for the common good. Since no individual anywhere on earth, no single individual, has the right to claim the ownership of another person's rights, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and magically called a right. Therefore, all forms of licensing and permits, according to natural law, are always wrongdoings because they are always based in coercion and the theft of someone else's rights. So again, that's the visualization exercise. There's 3 quick examples. You have to envision there's only 2 people. Would one person have a right to conduct that action against another? If the answer is no, the right cannot be, there's no such thing as calling it a right and delegating it to other people and telling them now you're allowed to perform that behavior. It's always a wrongdoing. But people, because of this idea, this mind control called government, want to believe that that right exists, that we can delegate something that is a wrongdoing. Force versus violence. We need to understand that these concepts are complete opposites of each other. They are not the same. The terms should never be used interchangeably with each other because not only are they not even remotely similar, they're direct, diametrically opposed opposites. let's look at the difference. They're often spoken about as if they're the same, and they're used interchangeably, when in fact they are actually diametrically opposed to each other. Force, the definition of force, is the capacity to do work or cause physical change in the physical world. Okay? For any change to be created in the physical world in any capacity, force must be used and applied. There's nothing you can do that doesn't require force if you're going to make a change happen in the physical. Okay? So, to set up this equipment, force was required. We had to lift it, we had to set it up, we had to plug in the cables. Force is required to do all those things. It's the capacity to perform physical activity, physical work. Okay? Action, force is actually action which is in harmony with morality and natural law, because the taking of it, the usage of it, doesn't violate rights of other people. So as soon as you're stepping over the line into coercive usage of force, that becomes violence. The initiation of force for coercive reasons, for coercive applications, becomes violence. That's what makes it violence. Force itself is not violence. As such, force is action which one always possesses the natural right to take, and this includes the defense, the physical defense of someone's person, their body, against the act of violence. Force may be applied in that situation. When you are accosted with violence, you do reserve the right to use physical force defensively against such an assault. Violence, on the other hand, and this is the key to keep in mind with violence, it is the immoral initiation of physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain unrightfully. No one has the right to ever enact violence, because violence is always starting it. Initiation, that's the key word there. It's the immoral, the unrightful initiation. So, teachers in schools will, if there's a skirmish that happens between a couple of male students one day, they'll say, it doesn't matter who started it. All that matters is who started it. All that matters is who started it. All that matters. Because the person who actually conducted violence is the person who struck first. They initiated the immoral use of physical behavior, of physical force, physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain. Therefore, when the person beats back that physical assault with force, they have not committed an additional wrongdoing. Okay? It's difficult for many people to understand who are in right brain imbalance. They don't want to acknowledge that you maintain the natural right to use force when you are accosted with violent behavior. If someone just came up to me on the street and started swinging, okay, because they want something I have, or just because they don't like the look of me for whatever reason, they don't have the right to do that. If I replied by beating back their attack with sufficient force to put that action down, how many wrongdoings would have been committed? One. Correct. One. Not two. One. Because I maintain the right to defend myself with physical power, with physical force when necessary, when violence, meaning someone else started the immoral behavior. That's what matters, the initiation. Who started it is all that matters. All that matters. And again, it's a very difficult thing for the ego to comprehend. The ego doesn't want to hear that. It's been conditioned so long that responding with force is also violence. We are verbally and mentally equating these two things, and when in fact they are actual complete opposites. Okay, if a kid got hit by somebody else in a school, and then that other kid maybe even said once, stop what you're doing, and then when the other kid wouldn't stop, he punched him and knocked him out. Okay, I would ask other people, who struck first? And if the kid lying on the floor struck first, I'd say you got what you deserved. That's it. Because that person had a right to defend themselves. You had no right to strike him. You initiated the violence. He responded with defensive force. Many people don't want to hear that because they're very conditioned. And I'm not saying you have to do that. You also reserve the right not to do that. But the right does exist. Both rights exist. You would have the right to not respond with physical force, but you would have the right to respond with physical force. See, that's a free will decision that the person has the right to choose between those actions. I don't even look at either one of them as the high road. You know? Personally, I think if somebody keeps beating somebody and keeps conducting violence to them, and the other person keeps accepting it and never rebels against it and never uses any force to put it down, I almost look at that as the low road. I'm not a pacifist. Not a pacifist. Okay? I am 100% about non-violence, meaning don't initiate harm to other people. Don't start it. Don't start none, won't be none. In street lingo. That's how it really is. Okay? But if somebody else starts it, they're asking to be put down with the amount of physical force that is required to put down the act of aggression. Violence is coercive action. See, that's the key. It's always coercion. Saying, you're going to do what I want you to do, or then I'm going to strike. Then I'm going to commit the act of violence. It's coercive. It's action which is always in opposition to morality and natural law for the very reason that it involves the violation of others' rights. That's why it's called violence. It's a violation. The act of violation resulted in violence. Your rights have been violated. That's why it's called violence. It's the same root word. Violence is action which one never possesses the right to take, ever. There is no such thing as the right to commit violence. Doesn't exist. Because violence is the immoral initiation of physical power to compel, coerce, restrain, which no one has the right to do. No, you don't have the right, no one does have the right to initiate that type of action. Force, on the other hand, there is a time and a place to exert that force in a defensive capacity. All right, so we'll talk about that here. This piece of trash comes up to somebody on the street and says, give me everything that's valuable. I want your shoes. Oh, they're leather? Take them off. Take the wallet out, all the jewelry. Give me your purse. Give me your wallet. Okay? It's called a thug. Nobody would believe he has the authority or the right to do that, and we would have the moral obligation to obey this criminal. You know, if the criminal started calling himself government, we might start believing him. Right? But let's say somebody on the street saw what was being done, took out their own 9mm and blew this guy away. How many acts of violence were committed? One.
They wouldn't look at it like that.
But what I understand. But again, that's somebody saying, I prefer not to see it that way. Well, again, perception and reality do not really align in many cases. They're not the same. That person is incorrectly perceiving what is. They're not seeing the truth. And many people don't want to hear that that's the truth because they're very conditioned and they are very well-behaved slaves. You know, as harsh as that is to say. They don't want to understand that the inherent right to use force against violence exists and is always our right. Always. Now, I'm not telling you go out and immediately do that either because the perception is so screwed up in the body of humanity that the majority of people don't believe that would be a right. And they'll persecute you for doing it. You see, the self-defense principle is continuously being eroded. Human beings possess the natural right to defend themselves from violence with defensive physical force. A person who is accosted by violence possesses the right to stop the person who is conducting the violence from continuing to do harm to them with any amount of force that is necessary to stop the attack or the assault, okay, up to and including deadly force. I would say, if you want to be nice about it, give the person one verbal warning to stop. Say no once. After that, it's on. That's it. And that's really my policy. Okay? That would be my policy on the street with an individual. The problem is here, the so-called authorities of the government, like you say, don't want to see it that way, and they're constantly trying to take this right away from somebody. They're constantly trying to say, no, we own the monopoly on the usage of force, and all you may do is wait and be accosted and assaulted until one of us shows up. Well, you know what that's called? It's called a big crock of bullshit, is what that's called. And it shouldn't be accepted by anyone who has any common sense. Shouldn't be accepted by anyone. Unfortunately, again, like I said, people are very, very well conditioned. And they think that this is an example of two wrongs don't make a right. There's no two wrongs committed there. There's one wrong committed, and then there's a right that is being exercised. Big difference between exercising a right that involves the defensive use of force and committing a wrongdoing which involves the initiation of violence. And people got to get clear on this. They have to get clear on it. So the question becomes, does violence magically become a right when it's conducted by government? When they shut down people's free speech rights and assembly rights? Or when they conduct direct theft from people through what's this euphemized form of slavery called taxation? And like I said, I'm not asking you to accept or believe taxation is slavery. I'm telling you, if you don't understand that, you're wrong. I don't care what you think. I'm telling you it is that way in truth and in reality. Taxation, slavery. Shutting down of people's rights is slavery. Telling people what they may or may not put in their body is slavery. It's not my perception. That's what is. Okay? And that's what we're accepting as a people. We're accepting that. These people have no more right to do it than any other individual would. And this concept brings us to the way I try to define and explain to people what real spiritual enlightenment is. Because what the New Age community is telling you that an enlightened being looks like is equally as a big crock of bull of what people who don't understand self-defense, the self-defense principle, believe. Okay? Enlightenment is not what this New Age nonsense community is trying to tell people that it is. All right? It's not about not taking action and sitting under a tree and meditating until you're magically enlightened. Okay? Enlightenment means knowing what's going on around you. Enlightenment means knowing what's going on within you. Enlightenment means truly knowing the true objective difference between right and wrong and living that in your life on a daily basis. Enlightenment means not aggressing upon your fellow human beings, but not agreeing voluntarily to be aggressed upon by them either. Okay? There's two pillars, two dynamics that go hand in hand with real enlightenment. I call this the two pillars of enlightenment. Okay? So here they are. The first pillar is the sacred feminine principle. This has been called the non-aggression principle. All right? It is the simple law of don't engage in violence. Or, quite simply put, don't steal. Don't steal. We talked about that. That's what all spiritual law can be boiled down to. Don't steal from other people. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't take life that isn't yours. Don't take property that isn't yours. Don't take rights that aren't yours. They're the property of others. Respect their ownership. Okay? Most people can grasp this pretty readily. Okay? And even in the New Age movement, they grasp this. In other words, don't immorally initiate non-rightful use of physical power to coerce, constrain, or compel the rightful physical behavior or free will choice of another sentient being. Respect other people's free will, their rights, their property, their life, period. Real simple. It's the golden rule. Don't do things to other people that you don't want done to you. I always state it in the apophatic, in the negative. It's much more powerful that way. But there is a second principle, a second pillar or tenet of enlightenment, if you will. This is the sacred masculine principle. This is what religions of the world, whether they be government, organized religion of different regions of the world and cultures, the New Age movement, all right, this is what they are seeking to suppress. Because religions are right brain modalities. They're right brain methods of mind control. Just like government, who thinks it's a monopoly on the physical use of force, that's a left brain imbalanced mindset. All right? The second pillar of enlightenment is the sacred masculine principle, which is also known as the self-defense principle. Your body's your property. You have a right to defend it when it comes under attack by violence. This principle states sentient beings have the inherent right to use force to defend themselves from violence conducted upon them by another. This is the part many people don't get. You know, that's why we're not rebelling against our slave keepers, our slave masters who are masters of other people in their own sick, distorted, psychopathic minds and are nothing but thugs and criminals that people magically believe have the moral authority to continue to do what they're doing just because they euphemize slavery and call it government now. That's the sacred masculine principle. There is no such thing as an enlightened being that doesn't fully grasp both of these principles. Anywhere. Never has been. There's no such thing as half measures. You got to get them fully, both, or you're not there. And that's the problem. We're not all the way there. If people were already there, they wouldn't be tolerating what we're putting up with. More aggression against people's rights is being conducted in this country than when the founders of this nation actually separated from England. And they would have been horrified. I tell people, look, not to get nasty, but I tell people, if the founders of this country could magically come back to life somehow and see what's going on in this country, they'd take a piss on people. That's what they would do. That's how much disrespect they would have for what we're putting up with. You know? Again, just to say it the way it really is. That's what they would want to do to us. Because they would tell us, we warn you about all this. We warn you about it all. And you know what you did? You ignored it. Ignored it. So what did all those people who died in that revolution die for? We have to understand true ownership. Real, deeply. Not peripherally. Super deeply. We got to know what we own and what we don't own. We have to understand, why is this our current condition? That's the question we asked at the beginning. And here's the reason. The reason our species continues to experience a systematic and growing loss of freedom is because we collectively do not deeply understand ownership and we continue to commit and condone theft. This is a prison for thieves. That's what Earth is. It's a prison for people that don't want to respect ownership. They want to take things that aren't theirs. And that's what we're here to learn. We're here to learn that there's only one natural law. Stop stealing from other people. Stop taking things that you don't own. Stop condoning theft of things that other people don't own. Don't condone that activity, that behavior either. So what is ownership? What's the definition? What does it entail? To own a thing means that regarding that thing, an individual maintains three basic things regarding it. The first is rightful possession. It means you acquired it without doing harm to somebody else. So you rightfully own it, lawfully own it. Okay? You're in possession of it. You have it in your possession. It is yours. The second thing is you control its usage. Okay? So your house, you control its usage. Your car, you control its usage. Your clothes, you control their usage. My computer is mine. I control its usage. I'm using it. Okay? Control of the usage of something means that you own it. And most of all, maintaining personal responsibility for that possession is the third aspect of ownership. So to own something means I'm in lawful, rightful possession of it. I control the usage of that thing, and I maintain personal responsibility for it. All right? And this is what we have to understand. Natural law can be essentially reduced to one single spiritual law. I gave you the working definition, the soundbite definition before. Here's the super simplified two-word concrescence of all of this information. Natural law gets boiled down to two words. Don't steal. That's it. You want the key out of the prison? You got to understand property. You got to understand all rights are property rights. Stop taking the property of other beings. Stop condoning the taking of the property of other beings. The end. You know, I should just get up here and say, don't steal, the end, everybody go home. Should be that simple. That's the key, folks. That's the key to the prison door. And what we're really talking about here is common sense. That's what conscience is. People don't think of conscience as common sense. You know, they don't think of conscience as knowledge. Conscience is knowledge. It's not action, it's not behavior. It's knowledge. Again, knowledge is the way out of this. Okay? And this is the knowledge that has to be developed. Conscience comes from the Latin prefix con, meaning together, and the Latin verb sciere, meaning to know or to understand. You put them together, to know together, to understand together. Conscience is common sense. Common sense knowing. Common sense knowledge. Literally. From the etymological breakdown of the word. Con, together, science, to know. That's why the problem is people don't have common sense. That's why I'm sitting there almost laughing hysterically that I need to try to teach common sense to people. The ridiculousness of it. What we all need to be doing is doing that work, you know? I know you guys get a lot of this. We need to start reaching out to other people. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Conscience, the definition of it, is the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong according to natural law. Objective. Definitive. Okay, it's not up for debate. It exists inherently and objectively. It can be understood, known, discovered. This is different from action. Conscience is the knowledge, then we act upon it. Okay? So it's different from understanding something and acting upon it. Right? To have conscience is to have common sense. It's to know the difference between right and wrong and understand that difference deeply. Then we're going to convert that into action. We exercise conscience. The exercise of conscience is actually action. The exercise of conscience is the free will choice of right action over wrong action once the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong according to natural law has been acquired and integrated into the being. We acquire that knowledge first, understand it, then we act in either accordance with it or disharmony with it. If we act in accordance with it, it's called the exercise of conscience. That's action. The law of freedom. This is one of the basic laws within the body of natural law. It's real simple. The law of freedom states that freedom and morality are directly proportional. It's a mathematical equation that works 100% of the time flawlessly. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines. This means the more moral a population is, the freer it becomes. The more immoral a population is, the deeper into bondage and slavery it goes. Another way of saying this is to say that the presence of truth and morality in the lives of the people of any given society is always inversely proportional to the presence of tyranny and slavery in that society. The more truth and morality there is, the less tyranny and slavery there is. The less truth and morality there is, the more tyranny and slavery there is. That's the law of freedom. And many people don't want to understand that. That these two things are inextricably interwoven and connected and can never be separated from each other. The presence of truth and morality in a society and the presence of freedom or its lack in a society. True freedom can never exist in a society that embraces moral relativism, which is the idea that there is no inherent and objective difference between right and wrong. So that humanity may just arbitrarily create or decide right and wrong for themselves. That's the ideology called moral relativism. As I've said before, it is the second tenet of the satanic religion. And it is deeply entrenched in this country and in the world. In our polls that we conducted, the psychological little tabulations that we did asking several people questions, 2/3 of people were moral relativists. 66%. Think about that. 2 out of 3 people believe there's no such thing as an objective difference between right and wrong and feel these are just constructs that exist by human beings and we get to make up what's right and what's wrong. 2/3 of people. That's where we're at. That's where we're really at. Natural law versus man's law or government.